police. I'm grateful to officers from my part of North London again after they also rearrested Mr Kabatu. I'm grateful too to the wider Metropolitan Police and the public who assisted them. I can tell the House, Mr Speaker, that in the year to March 2025, there were around 57,000 routine releases from prison. In that same time, there were 262 releases in error from prison. New data my department published today shows that from April to the end of October this year, there were 91 releases in error from prison. Further data on the breakdown of offences are official statistics that need to be combed through in detail before being put into the public domain. This was not a publication due today, but we recognise the public interest in being transparent about the overall number. It's important to note that this may be revised as additional cases are subsequently recorded, but this is the very latest that I have been provided. We understand that there are 3 mistakenly released prisoners currently lawfully at large. Their prison records show none of these are convicted sex offenders. I have been informed, Mr Speaker, this afternoon that HMPPS are investigating a further case of a potential release in error on the 3rd of November who may still be at large. It is symptomatic of the data issues we inherited that all this information I have been given at this time while police and HMPPS investigate. Of the confirmed cases, Case 1 was in prison for failing to surrender to the police and released in error in December 2024. Case 2 was in a prison for a Class B drug offence and released in error in August 2024. And Case 3 was in prison for aggravated burglary and released in error in June 2025. 2 are a British national and 1 is a foreign national offender. I will not provide any further details on individual cases. In each case, we have to consider the welfare of victims and the judgment of our law enforcement agencies. Of the 262 releases in error from prison in the year to March 2025, 87 were of offenders whose main offence was violence against the person, and 3 whose main offence was a sexual offence. I'm clear that we must bear down on these numbers, which are symptomatic of a prison system under horrendous strain. As the Shadow Justice Secretary admitted last week, the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. Prisons today are still struggling with violence. The safety and custody statistics show an 8% rise in the rate of assaults in the year to June 2025. Systems are archaic. Every prisoner's sentence is worked out on paper, considering the type of offence and the legislation covered by it. Mr Speaker, there are more than 500 pages of sentence management guidance. Mr Speaker, I pay tribute to prison officers doing an incredibly important job. But as the Prison Officers Association has said, prisons throughout the country are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they're operating under relentless strain. Frontline prison officers were cut by a quarter between 2010 and 2017. That's around 6,000 fewer people, and means that there are less experienced staff, which places more pressure on the system, and unsurprisingly, mistakes happen in those circumstances. Indeed, from 2010-11 to the end of 23-24, under the previous government, there were 860 known releases in error from prison. We must recognise the distress caused to victims, knowing that the person who harmed them is free when they should be behind bars. In the worst cases, like William Fernandez back in 2021, prisoners have committed further horrific offences. I give an unequivocal apology to all who have faced worry or worse as a result of releases in error, especially Hadush Kabatu's victims, who I'm offered to meet. I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite will join me in that apology to all who have suffered because of releases in error under this and previous governments. Mr. Speaker, human error will always exist, and no Justice Secretary could prevent every mistake. But we must reduce the risk and reverse the trend over the course of this Parliament. But we must be honest, the release process requires a radical overhaul, and establishing the facts in individual cases is complex. Decisions about public statements rightly rest with the police. Issuing details too early could frustrate covert inquiries or put police officers or the public at risk. These are judgments for experienced operational leaders, and parliamentarians must give them the space to make them. Mr. Speaker, this is a complex issue. We must be straight with the public about that, and I'm clear that we have a mountain to climb in response. So first, I'm chairing a new Justice Performance Board. It will give a comprehensive view of prisons and criminal court performance, including releases in error, to drive a step change in how we respond. The first monthly meeting took place yesterday. Secondly, I'm making sure we understand the issues. Following the release of Kabatu, I asked Damien Owens to carry out a review. This will conclude by the end of February next year. It will now include the adequacy of data collected and published on releases in error, and we fully expect to uncover additional incidents. I can also announce that we will set up a team of data scientists to review historic releases in error to understand what's going wrong. Third, I'm improving processes, because some of these errors actually originated not in the prison process, but in the court process. I will implement an urgent warrant query unit supported by court experts so that prisons can escalate queries and get rapid clarifications to reduce the risk of releases in error that emanate from the court system. We're also issuing instructions to court staff to reinforce mandatory requirements for imprisoned orders, to be confirmed verbally with judges before finalising a measure which has been shared with the judiciary. The court and the prison service are also scoping a joint exercise to look at live warrants. Initially taking place within the London region, it will identify errors and ensure prisoners are subject to the correct warrants. Fourth, I'm accelerating upgrades. I stood up a digital rapid response team last week to reduce human error with cutting-edge technology. Over the next 6 months, we will provide up to £10 million to deliver AI and technology solutions to help frontline staff avoid mistakes and support them to calculate sentences accurately. Finally, I'm simplifying the release policy. One of the aims of the sentencing bill is to standardise how cases are treated, and following Damien Owens' review, we will consider whether amendments are required to operational policy. These are the initial steps to address the issue, but I will update the House where further changes are necessary. I commend this statement to the House.
Right, can I just clear something up? And it's not got to happen. First of all, I was told Justice Secretary needed 13 minutes. Just bear with me. And I said, look, you need to ask. And in the end, the department came back and said, oh no, it's 10. It then wasn't 10, it was almost 12 minutes. I will work with Ministers and Secretary of State, but it is 10 minutes. If there needs to be an extension, please ask, don't keep changing the times, because in the end, it is unfair to shadow ministers when it goes over. So what I would say is, you've got an extra minute, you've got an extra half a minute, but please, stick to the rules of 10. If you do need longer, I am always sympathetic as long as I know in advance, but to have this conversation with the department that it was no longer needed makes your department look foolish, and it certainly am not going to make me look foolish in the future. Shall the Justice Secretary?
So, Mr. Speaker, we're back here again then. At least the Justice Secretary gets some use out of his new suit. But where has Wednesday's bombast and bravado gone? Get a grip, man, he thundered last week, without even a hint of irony. None of that today, was there? And why is that? Well, it's because, like increasing numbers of criminals in our jails, the Justice Secretary just doesn't know whether he's coming or going. Even his colleagues in government are now turning on him, some with unbridled contempt. The handling is terrible, was the verdict of a cabinet minister. Just rank incompetence. Cowardly. Frankly, pretty dodgy, was the verdict of another. Before long, the Prime Minister will be saying he has full confidence in him. And we all know what that means. Look, 2 weeks ago, he came to the House and he said he had put in place the strongest checks ever to stop releases in error. 48 hours later, another prisoner with a history of sex offences was released in error. 7 days later, and a fraudster is let out the very day he was sentenced to 45 months inside. And today, he admits that he's lost another prisoner that same day. They're Lammy's lags, a whole new category of criminal who can just waltz out of prison despite having the strongest ever checks introduced by this Justice Secretary. The public are being endangered as this circus rumbles on, week after week, with no end in sight. When will he put a stop to it? He can't just hide behind the inquiry that he's commissioned. He couldn't even get the head of the review, Lynn Owens, name right last week. Anne Owens. Anne Owens, he bellowed. Well, I looked her up, and the only Anne Owens I could find was a panto performer who recently appeared in Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps she was the one who gave him some tips on his performance at the dispatch box last week. The former Chief Inspector of Prisons says that this has been caused, at least in part, by the confusion created by Labour's botched early release scheme. Does he now concede that there is a link between the doubling of prisoners accidentally released in the last year and the introduction of their SDS 40? Or is it just an extremely unlucky coincidence? Don't take us for fools. And Mr. Speaker, when will he finally come clean? He won't provide details in parliamentary questions. He won't answer even when he is here for Prime Minister's questions. He won't respond to letters. Well, perhaps that's because they weren't addressed to the Deputy Prime Minister. He's now been dragged here, kicking and screaming, to admit that one prisoner has been on the run from this Labour government for 14 months, and 91 have been accidentally released over the last 7 months. But the Justice Secretary is so clueless, he's literally lost track of how many prisoners he's lost. He says today a prisoner may have been accidentally released last Monday. Well, has he looked? He's either in his cell or he's not. What a complete and utter farce he's presiding over. As we all suspected, the crisis on his government's watch is even bigger than he dared admit. That's why he wouldn't say anything last week. Prisoners are being accidentally released nearly every other day and putting our constituents, his constituents, at risk. At this rate, he's on track for 156 prisoners to be accidentally released this year, which would be a record were it not for the doubling his government managed to achieve last year under their watch. And in his statement today, he poses more questions than he manages to answer. How many crimes were committed by those prisoners whilst they were on the run? Why can't he tell us who these 91 prisoners are? Who is the foreign criminal? And who is this mystery fourth offender he may have lost? How can he possibly be found if the public don't have his face? They don't have his name, like they did for Sharif and Kabatu. The public deserve to know the truth, and this situation could not be any more serious. There's been a 9-fold increase in the number of violent offenders accidentally released in the last year. A 9-fold increase. The criminal justice system, under his watch, has been made to look a total mockery. The public are being put at risk. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it's time for him to get a grip or go.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a crisis that we inherited in our prison system. And it's worthy of sober reflection, because he knows, Mr. Speaker, that when they were in government, there were 17 prisoners released in error every month. He knows that. He knows too, because the former Conservative Justice Secretary said on the issue last Friday, we essentially run our prisons regime very hot. We are very close to capacity. We have seen a big increase in the prison population over the last 20 years, and resources have not necessarily matched that. That is the first problem. And another former Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, said part of the issue is we can't hold on to prison officers without that expertise. Errors creep in. And he himself also challenged their record in office. So he knows that this is a cross-party issue that, of course, we have to grip. Now, I said that I put in place those checks, and I stand by the checks that I put in. I also said in my statement, that the cases that we are uncovering, many of them occurred before those checks were in place, and another case involved an error that was in the court system, and that's why this new query process is very important indeed. And it is the case that we had to introduce SDS 40, and he knows why that's the case, because his government, just in the last few months in office, made 3 different changes to their early release scheme. So worried were they about prison capacity, a prison capacity issue that we inherited. He knows 500 extra places in the prison system is all that they built in 14 years in office, 14 years, and we've pledged 14,000 by 2031. He also knows, like night follows day, if you cut officers by almost 50%, is what they did in office, you cut those officers, and then you recruit new officers, as we've attempted to do. These are very junior people working hard, and I thank them for all that they're doing. But in those circumstances, mistakes will be made. I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this, really, really important. I've put in place the digital team because he knows also that this is a system based on human beings, therefore you get error. Only technology will fix this issue over time, and I've now put in place this double check between the court and the prison system.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the initiatives the Lord Chancellor has announced to deal with the wrongful release, but does he accept that the level and circumstances of such releases are symptomatic of a deeper malaise? Will he look at the Justice Committee current reports on drug culture, organised crime and lack of education and work in prisons? And will he commit to tackling the underlying breakdown of order and discipline in the prison system, which over years of decline have made many prisons unsafe, chaotic and unfit for purpose?
Justice.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for all that he is doing, and he has been on these issues for many years. His words echo those of the prison inspector, and of course he knows that this is a system that's incredibly hot, frankly, because violence is up, self-harm is an issue, drones and the things that are arriving in prison, particularly drugs, is also an issue, and then we have staff doing the best they can in very, very difficult circumstances. He knows too that no government could turn around the austerity that this public service saw in 16 months in office.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Jess Brownfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the situation wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. It seems like people have tougher checks to currently speak to an advisor at HMRC or get a GP appointment than offenders have to be released from a prison. Since the mistaken releases of recent weeks, I have heard horrendous reports from prison officers inside prisons. Prisoners identified by low-quality black and white photographs, printed on paper, a few basic questions on personal information before being cleared for release, information that could be readily shared between inmates before release. That is not good enough, especially when we now have biometric technology which is currently used for visitors to prisons and not inmates. We cannot be relying on an honour-based system, reliant on the goodwill of convicts to hand themselves in, and police forces certainly don't have spare capacity to be conducting regular manhunts for people that should still be locked up. After the release of Hadush Gabatu, the Deputy Prime Minister promised enhanced security checks. Yet since then, some of society's most dangerous individuals have still ended up on our streets. So will he now spell out what those enhanced checks actually involve, and whether biometric testing is used routinely to confirm a prisoner's identity before release? And can he confirm what training prison officers receive before managing prison releases? Like most of the justice system, our prison system has been mismanaged and underfunded by the previous complacent Conservative government, so we do appreciate that this government inherited this mess. However, the numbers of mistaken prisoner releases have risen sharply under their watch, and they cannot continue to risk public safety, particularly given the fact that it took them a whole 7 days to realise a prisoner had been mistakenly released, and are seemingly blaming an email being unread for the most recent error. Can he confirm how long the Ministry of Justice has known about the 3 prisoners at large, and how long have the police been trying to find them? The Deputy Prime Minister has promised the public an investigation, but they cannot wait months for answers while their safety continues to be put at risk. So what immediate action can he take today to ensure that dangerous criminals stay behind bars and these mistakes stop once and for all?
Sarah State.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, when she reflects on the releases in error, that 57,000 people are released from prison every year, and I'm sure, like me, she would commend the good work of prison officers and those in offender management units across our prisons doing a very difficult job in what are very difficult circumstances. She refers to the complexity. The last government kept expanding its emergency release scheme from 18 days first, then to 35 days, then to 70 days. At 2021, a review found 503 pages of guidance that staff had to follow for early release. It's a paper-based system. And so I cannot stand here as a Secretary of State and say that in a paper-based system that you can eradicate all human error. You can't. The only way to deal with that would be technology, to bring those levels down to something that I think the House would think was acceptable. I want to see the figure come down to historic levels over the course of this in Parliament. It will, of course, take further investment, but I hope that the investment in 10 million in this new digital team, and indeed the support that we're offering now between courts and prisons, will make a substantial difference. She asked me what I'm doing: a new Justice Performance Board, of course Damien Owen's review, the urgent query process that I've outlined, the digital rapid response system, and of course simplifying the release policy, which is effectively what comes out of the sentencing bill.
Linda Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that wrongful releases of prisoners would have caused a lot of distress and anxiety to the victims, their families and others? But does he also agree excuse me, that we inherited a prison system that was in complete chaos, and it was in such a major breakdown that whilst we are taking the appropriate action now to sort out the prison system and to prevent wrongful releases, this is going to take some time.
So state.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's absolutely right. And I think the public recognise this, that they won't particularly have visited our prisons, but they know that cuts in our public services are real. They see it in their local authorities. They see it in their local hospitals. They see it in their local schools. They know that things like Shore Start were decimated. And so too, our prison service, which the public don't see, I'm afraid was one of the worst hit public services. Now, it's my job to minimise that risk to the public, and that's why I'm introducing the measures that we are. That's why I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this very, very carefully, former head of the National Crime Agency, and I know she'll do a forensic examination, and I'll implement her recommendations so we can bear down on this problem. But it's a paper-based system. I didn't realise coming into this job that it was a paper-based system. I'm not sure the Shadow Justice Secretary has realised at all since he's been doing this job that it's a paper. But his former Justice Secretaries under his government know that it's a paper-based system, and they know that's why errors happen.
Dr. Neil Shastra-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mistaken releases of prisoners don't just undermine public trust and confidence in the system, they cost money. They cost money because the police have to go and find them and return them to prison. Can the Secretary of State set out how much it has cost the police to return prisoners to prison since this government came to power?
So state.
Well, previous governments did not have that data, and I'm pretty confident that I don't have that data. If it does exist, it exists with individual police forces who deal with these issues operationally. But he's absolutely right. Every prisoner released in error has to be found by the police. I thank the police for all that they've done, and I particularly thank Haringey Police for finding the 2 high-profile cases.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the system in force for many years, the government cannot initiate deportation action until after minimum custodial terms have been served. So can the Deputy Prime Minister commit to ensuring that measures removing all minimum custodial requirements will be implemented so that eligible foreign offenders can be removed as soon as possible after sentencing so victims can be spared the distress we've recently seen?
I can give him that undertaking. That's why we brought forward the sentencing review. That's why we've increased the removal of foreign national offenders for 5,000. All of it done in the last 16 months, something they never did once.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 days before Kadur Sharif was released, the Justice Secretary said he had introduced the strictest checks ever seen in our prison system to stop similar unacceptable errors in future. Were they not implemented, or are they not strict enough?
So state.
I say to the honourable judge, were you not listening? I discussed the cases just a few moments ago. I discussed that those cases emanated prior to those checks, so many of them, and that those cases also, one of the errors started in the court system. It's also the case, and I've been crystal clear about that with the House, in a paper-based system where the most junior people often in our OMUs are dealing with this, you cannot eradicate all human error. And any Secretary of State that stood up this dispatch box and said that would be telling a mistruth.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, must solve the immediate problem of the accidental releases, which are a huge issue. But in terms of the longer-term planning, we have a very high vacancy rate within our prisons. I understand what the Secretary of State has said about the work that's gone into bringing this down, but will he look at the Justice Select Committee's recommendation to produce a 10-year plan for workforce for the prison system in the same way as we do for the NHS?
So, sir.
Very grateful to my honourable friend, and we are looking at that recommendation. There are significant workforce issues. We're asking our prison officers to work under a system that the prison inspector himself has said is cracking and is at breaking point, and we must invest in our workforce.
That's a man.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The day before Prime Minister's questions last week, we spent hours discussing the Public Office Accountability Bill. And I just wondered, bearing in mind there's such a crash in public trust and confidence, whether the Lord Chancellor considered that it might have been better to have referred to the fact that he knew that there was a mistaken release of a prisoner in the offing. He might not have been able to give the details, but I think in order to restore public trust and confidence, and in light of the Public Office Accountability Bill, whether it might be better to have said something and to hold over that decision and say he would come back later to the House with more detail.
So stay.
Well, I recognise why the Honourable Lady, who's very reasonable, is making her comment in the way that she is. But I simply say that we inherited a system where 17 errors in release are made every single month. There is a data release every July. I've now updated the House with more information than the House has ever had about this issue. But I've also been clear, as any Justice Secretary would be, that we are not going to be able to eradicate human error and not going to be able to get back to historic levels quickly. But I put in place as much as I can to minimise the risk to the public.
Andrew Peggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member representing a prison constituency, I'd like to put on record my thanks to prison and probation staff who work hard under difficult circumstances. But in recognising that, I also know the pressure the prison system is under. It is shocking that a legacy of 14 years handed over to this government, a paper-based system and a prison system that was breaking. The party opposite likes to talk about a farce. If they want to talk about a farce, I will hand them a mirror to look into, because the only farce here is the breaking system. So can my honourable friend tell me what more we can do to support prison staff? Yes, there needs to be accountability, but we need to invest in technology, invest in solutions, and give our prisons the systems they need to stop these things happening in the future.
So stay.
Well, he's absolutely right. The best way to deal with this is to move to a system that's based on technology. To use the AI that's out there to properly compare records, whether they come from the court or whether they're from early release. That will take significant time, but I have found £10 million to at least begin that process, and that process begins as a result of these recent high-profile cases.
Sandra Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that even the West Midlands Victims Commissioner, Natalie Kairosh, is herself living in fear due to the government's new release guidelines on open prisons. In 2016, she was stabbed in my constituency 24 times by her ex-partners. She was 8 months pregnant. Her attacker was jailed for 18 years, but is now moving to an open prison 4 years earlier than expected. And Natalie is terrified of coming face to face with him. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman explain why those convicted of domestic abuse who cannot apply for early parole under the SDS 40 process are not also excluded from the government's dangerous policy of moving offenders to open prisons?
So say.
Well, I know that the Victims Minister has met with her, and he will also know that in the sentencing bill we have restriction zones that can restrict the movement of those who have committed crimes like the one he refers to.
Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Wandsworth MP, my constituents are very concerned about these releases, and they have seen years of underfunding of Wandsworth Prison, but they've also seen more investment by this government since coming into power than for years and years before that. And I have every confidence from visiting the Wandsworth Prison about their new governance and the systems that are putting in place. I thank the Justice Minister for his response to my letter outlining the changes in training, technology and resources that are being put in place to redress these wrongs, and the digital rapid response unit. Could the Minister, just for the sake of my constituents, outline those stronger release checks that he has put in place straight away?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and for all of the work that she's doing in her community. And I recognise there will be anxiety in her constituency as a result of high-profile cases that have emanated from Wandsworth. She will know that one of those cases involved an error that actually started in the court system back in September before the checks that I have put in place. But when she asked me to outline what I've done, what it effectively means is that the duty governor, deputy governor are having a double look at what comes out of their OMUs, which are largely staffed by slightly more junior staff in relation who are making these decisions on who should be released from custody. But I look forward to visiting Wandsworth with her in the coming months.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministerial Code requires honesty and transparency, and on the 28th of October I asked a written parliamentary question of how many of those released in error under this government remained at large. On the 3rd of November I received an answer, Mr. Speaker, but it did not answer the question. Was that because they didn't know the answer of how many people were at large, or they chose not to be transparent and give the answer?
I explained at length in my statement who is at large. I have released data today outwith of the normal cycle of releasing in July, which was done under the last government. I have been as transparent with this House today on this issue than any minister has been. And I would remind the House, I checked the record, despite 860 releases in error under their watch, they never came to the House once.
Nope.
Not once on this issue. Not once.
Speaker, our constituents deserve a prison system they can have confidence in. And yet, prisoner releases in error increased every year since 2021. Despite that, there was no call for an investigation. There were no reforms. Can the Minister therefore please reassure my Carlisle constituents that it is this government that will implement the findings of Dame Limoin's investigation and restore the confidence that was eroded under the previous government?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right. Not once did they make a statement, even when William Fernandez was released in error under them and went on to commit an horrific crime. Not once did a minister come to the dispatch box. Not once did they release extra detail. And I've done that today.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A Torquay solicitor has recently told me of multiple occasions where there has been a lack of security staff to convey convicted criminals from Newton Abbot Magistrates Court to prison. This, on one occasion, one individual started self-harming. On another occasion, an individual waited and then left and absconded because they were locking up the building. He was then arrested at a later stage following a machete attack. How often is this happening across the United Kingdom, and what are you doing to stop this failure within the system?
Well, in a sense, he raises issues beyond the prison system, and he's right about the delivery mechanism of prisoners from court to prisons. He knows, because it's come up in oral questions again in the House, the issue that we inherited of backlogs from the party opposite. He knows also that we're demanding that our police arrest more and bear down on crime. So the criminal justice system is phenomenally hot. All of this will affect the prison system. That's why we've asked Brian Levinson to look at the issues of efficiency, particularly that relates to the court backlog. And part of that is that relationship between security and between the movement of people from our courts to our prison system.
Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I chaired the Public Accounts Committee, and when I was on it, so I served for over 10 years, we looked at and uncovered, with the help of the National Audit Office, failures in the probation service, which was a yo-yo policy between ministers as they changed. failure to build prisons, failure to maintain prisons, failure with the court IT system, and failure with identifying information that needed to be shared. Is he aware of the McGee Review, which was commissioned at the tail end of the last Labour government? And can he speculate why the McGee Review was never implemented over 14 years of a Conservative government?
Well, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for mentioning the McGee Review and their recommendations. And of course, I've asked my officials to look closely at the things that were recommended and do they pertain to the crisis that we've inherited today, and I'm grateful for her highlighting that issue. She will know that under the Conservatives, 24% cuts the prison service saw, and because of them, today over half of our frontline prison officers have less than 5 years experience. It's shocking. That's what we inherited.
So, Julian.
May I try and make a constructive suggestion to the Deputy Prime Minister? Has he considered that when somebody is due for release, they should be read a short statement saying that if they think they are being wrongly released, they should say so now, and if they do not do so, a further penalty of some sort will be imposed? Might not that act as a bit of a deterrent as well as a check?
Well, the honourable member makes a reasonable point, but the truth is that because of the complexity of the various early release schemes, the numerous guidance that exists, the many different thresholds, that often the prisoner himself is not completely aware of whether they should be released on Monday or whether they're released on Thursday. And sometimes it's possible that when a prisoner has been released in error, that it's by a matter of days. It's not a significant period. But I recognise why he says what he says. We do have to make sure that there's an obligation on the prisoner, and it is something that I will ask Lynn Owens to look closely at.
Alex Backett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Shadow Secretary of State in his remarks seems to have kicked off panto season, and his comments reminded me of my favourite character, Buttons, who longs to be Prince Charming. If only his colleagues would write into the 1920-22 committee so that he can formally start his leadership bid. But in the spirit of panto season, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in reminding the Shadow Secretary of State that if he's looking for the reason why our prisons are in this state, they're behind him?
Well, he puts it beautifully, but I suspect it's why that the Shadow Justice Secretary said last week that the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. I suspect it's why William Hague, the former leader of the Conservative Party, said that the government failed to grasp either they didn't build more prisons, they didn't have enough people in our prisons, and this has been a long period of real failure.
But a message objected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between the 5th of July and the end of the reporting period in March, this government has overseen the accidental release of 193 prisoners. That's 5 prisoners every week. And we now know that there have been a further 91 accidental prison releases since the 1st of April, so 284 in total. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give my constituents that no prisoners have been accidentally released from HMP Littlehay in my constituency since Labour took office?
He knows that about 17 prisoners a day were released in errors under the last government, and he knows too that in introducing their early release scheme and our emergency early release scheme, there's complexity in the system. I will look closely at the data that is available in relation to his prison.
Catherine Fuchs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Having spoken to my prison governor this weekend in Monmouthshire, I know the burden clerks and prison officers are under when they are calculating these sentences on paper. And the brass neck of the party opposite has got something to be believed. Their own party grandee, William Hague, said the Conservative government failed to grasp either that they had to build more prison places or they had to let people out. They didn't face up to either. Those are his words. So can the Secretary of State share with me how we are tackling both?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question. She's absolutely right. We've got to grip the system. I did that by chairing a performance board in the department yesterday. I've done that by asking Dame Lynn Owens to look at this closely. There does now need to be an urgent query process working between courts and prisons so that we aren't seeing those mistakes between the two systems. It will take digital technology, ultimately, I think, to fix this. But I've started that with 10 million to expand the digital rapid response unit so that we can at least start to flag in the system and across the system so that those working in our offender management units can spot where there might be an issue and there might be a problem. And I'm very pleased the sentencing bill that's now been through this House will simplify the system greatly because it's too complex at the moment.
Good job.
Speaker, Kabatu was released in error on the 24th of October, which is a Friday. I was under the impression that in the last Parliament, Simon Fell, the former member for Barrow, passed a rather brilliant private members' bill which became the Offenders Act 2023, which said that a prisoner cannot be released on a Friday without the Secretary of State say so, in order to reduce recidivism because people can't get access to the state for 72 hours. So has the Secretary of State devolved that to prison governors? And if they are being seen to be ignoring the will of this House, would he draw that power back up to himself?
So State.
Well, the Right Honourable Judge makes a very good point. The system had got to a place where prisoners weren't being released on Friday. That was relaxed, is my understanding, and I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at that again.
Sir Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the weekend, I was visited in my constituency surgery by one of the many hard-working prison officers from Durham, himself a victim of the chaos in the justice system that the previous government left behind. But before he left, he wanted me to know just how bad it is and why people are being released early. And as we all know, 800 were released early on their watch. So bad was the chaos that they created. He references that it's getting worse because of the chaos that they created. It got worse every year on their watch too. But would the Deputy Prime Minister give me the assurance, both for the victims of crime but also for our hard-working prison officers, that he will do what it takes to get to the bottom of this? And he's referenced the paper-based system without preempting Dame Owens' review. Will we be moving away from that 1980s paper-based system?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. He's right. 17 releases in error per month in 2024. And just in their last days in office, there was a step change in those releases in error. And it started very much going back to 2021 under their watch. But why did it start? Because of the complexity of the system and needing to introduce new mechanisms to get prisoners out because of an overheated prison place. We've got to be able to lock up the most violent people. That's why it's happened, and now, of course, we're going to do everything we can to get a grip.
I'll try and remember.
Speaker, it's good to see a quieter, more emollient, even by his own lights, humbler Secretary of State at the dispatch box today than the one we saw last week. Can the Justice Secretary say how many people have been wrongly detained? Yes. And how much money his department is setting aside for the likely ensuing litigation?
Secretary of State.
Well, he knows that we release those statistics on an annual basis, but I think behind his question that he knows just as the system releases prisoners in error, sometimes it also retains prisoners when they should be released. The two go hand in hand.
That's MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure as the Lord Chancellor made his statement, it will be victims that will be forefront of his mind. I think we can all only imagine the fear and distress that is caused to victims when someone who has caused them so much harm is released in error. So can the Secretary of State say in more detail and assure us that in those circumstances, victims and their families receive support and that they're fully informed about what is happening?
Secretary of State.
Well, she's right to put front and centre the victims, and rightly the anxiety that they will be feeling. And it's right too, I've published more data today than has ever been before on this issue, because I recognise the concern that there is in the public at this time. But it's also right that I leave and work with the police and our enforcement agencies on the publication of particular cases, because sometimes, either because victims have not been informed or it would be dangerous to publish names, or indeed it might mean that the prisoner is able to know that he's being looked for and goes underground, or she's being looked for. For all of those reasons, we have to work with the police on these very sensitive issues in order to protect the public and absolutely to protect victims.
James Wyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Public safety should be the Justice Secretary's priority. So why did it take 6 days for the Metropolitan Police to be informed that a sex offender had been wrongly released from HMP Wandsworth?
Well, as I said, I've apologised from this dispatch box. Human error is in the system. There are delays, not just within our prisons, but also between different agencies, and that's why I've put in place the query system particularly.
Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government inherited a prison system which was so weakened by austerity, but it was also overcrowded by a justice system which failed to actually look at rehabilitation as well as punishment. Would the Secretary of State redouble the department's efforts to match employers who want to give prisoners a chance to learn skills and the habit of work with the opportunity to do so while serving their sentence and after, so that we're able to ensure that our communities are safer because we rehabilitate as well as punish?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, because she's emphasising punishment that works, and punishment that works has got to mean skills, education and employment, so that people don't go on to reoffend. And we've inherited a system where recidivism rates are beyond 60%, which means that the system isn't working, even though it's overheated. So these are issues that we have to look at in time. The sentencing bill is the beginning of the story, but we will have to return to these issues if we're serious about reducing reoffending.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recent events and today's court ruling bring to the surface again the anxiety of our Epping community. My thoughts, Mr. Speaker, remain with the victims, including the 14-year-old Epping schoolgirl. Appallingly, they and their families heard about this wrongful prisoner release from media instead of the government. It is frankly astonishing the government are only using their levers of power in the courts to overturn this case brought by the council, but are not using their powers to address the issues in the front line: the illegal immigration crisis, mistaken release of convicted prisoners, and serious management and safeguarding issues associated with the Bell Hotel, which needs to close urgently. When will the government get a grip, realise that they are not political commentators, but they are players on the pitch, and use their powers to tackle these issues once and for all?
Well, I recognise the sensitivity of this issue in his constituency, and I do recognise that many will have looked closely at that decision in the courts today. He knows that under the last government, £9 million a day being spent on housing people in hotels. He knows that the government is committed to a new programme, and we're looking, for example, at military bases to see where we can house. But he also knows that we have increased the amount of foreign nationals leaving this country and returning to the countries that they are from.
Paul Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to put on record my thanks to all the prison officer staff at Buckley Hall Prison in Rochdale, who've held the line in the face of impossible cuts and challenges over the last 14 years under the last government. It's hard to imagine the sheer distress that's caused to victims and their families whenever there is a release in error of any prisoner, as happened, as has been said, 800 times under the last government, without a single apology, without a single independent inquiry, without a single photo, without a single name that are being demanded by the shadow leader up on the other side. Does he agree that victims and their families should be put at the heart of our reforms when we're trying to make sure this never happens again.
So stay.
He's absolutely right, and it's one of the reasons why I asked Dame Lynn Owens, as she looks at this issue, to meet with the victims, particularly of Kabatu's crime, and keep victims in mind. We do have to ensure, notwithstanding the errors that have been made, public confidence in the system. And it is important, of course, to assert once again from this dispatch box that 57,000 people are released from prisons every year. And the vast majority of those lead to no error at all.
Chris Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement today and the manner in which he has delivered it. The wrongful release of prisoners is of huge concern to my constituents in Harlow, and can I echo the comments made by colleagues across the House that ultimately the people that really suffer from this are the victims of those terrible crimes. Having previously worked for a homeless charity in Harlow, I saw a number of prisoners who were released on a Friday. They'd come to us on a Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock with nowhere to go. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that actually when we release people from prison, we should make sure they have somewhere to go? And actually, if they have to declare where they're going to go after they're released, we may be able to avoid some of these mistakes.
And he's right that the Friday release issue, was often about public services not being available over the course of Friday evening into Saturday, and the homelessness problem that pertains to. And it's why I think it is important that we re-look at what is happening in the system and the system that we inherited.
Alison Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 10th of October, Ola Abimbola, a violent Nigerian criminal, walked out of Ford Open Prison in my Bognor Regis and Littlehampton constituency. He hasn't been seen since. He's meant to be serving 21 years for GBH, kidnap and possession of an offensive weapon. So I asked the Secretary of State, how many other prisoners are at large from Ford Open Prison and what offences were they imprisoned for?
So state.
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that absconding is a serious criminal offence, that any defendant who commits this crime could face longer behind bars. It's a different issue, of course, to releases in error, because there have always existed Category D prisons and absconds. Those prisoners are assessed, but I want to assure her that actually when we look at the trend of those who are absconding, it is on a downward trend, with 57 in the year to March 2025.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Justice Secretary aware of any crimes committed by wrongly released prisoners whilst at large?
Well, as I've just said, under the last government, William Fernandez went on to commit an horrific crime. They never came to the dispatch box. By definition, if we got to a situation, and we did in 2024, where 17 releases in error were happening, of course it's possible that people can go on to commit crimes. That's why I'm hugely grateful. I know it's police resource, for the efforts of our police to rearrest these individuals, and some of them, as we saw last week, hand themselves back in when they realise that it has been committed in error. Our job is to minimise risk, but in a paper-based system we can never eradicate risk in time.
Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Secretary said one of the prisoners accidentally released and still at large is a foreign national offender, and I know after PMQs last week he will be very well briefed this week. So can he say whether the prisoner was inside for aggravated burglary, drug offences or failing to surrender to the police? And can he also say how this foreign national offender entered the country and whether he was an asylum seeker?
So stay.
Well, I've made available as much detail as I can, given that normally this information is released in July. Case 2 was in prison for a Class B drug offence, and my understanding is, to the best of my knowledge, that that was the F&O prisoner, and I'm telling the honourable gentleman that, but I will have it double-checked because this information was made available to me very recently, and I will write to him if I make an error.
Right, Shelbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, I have 2 prisons, one at Wetherby, one at Wealdstone. I have 2 on the outside, one at Askham Grange, one at Fort Sutton. And they've heard the Secretary of State say that he has put in place some of the strongest measures ever there. The only question that my constituents want to answer to, Mr. Speaker, is when will they be able to say that they don't fear people being dangerous criminals being released onto the streets and terrorising their communities?
So stay.
Well, I recognise the anxiety that this will have caused, and in a way this has been a revelation to the public that people are released in error from our system. And I'd want to emphasise that the vast majority of people are released in the correct manner, 57,000 released every year, but under successive governments for all of my lifetime, there have been releases in error. We want to bring that down to historic levels because it has been going up since 2021, but in a paper-based system, implemented often by junior staff. I cannot stand here and say we will eradicate it, but we will reduce it over the course of this Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in Prime Minister's Questions, the Deputy Prime Minister said, quote, "Get a grip, man. I know I'm the Justice Secretary." Well, I'm pleased he knows he's the Justice Secretary, and with it comes leadership. So can he guarantee for the public going forward he has a grip on the issue of released prisoners by mistake?
So said.
Well, that's why I chaired a new performance board. That's why I've asked Damien Owens to look at this issue intensively. That's why I found 10 million for a digital rapid response unit. That's why, because there's this gap sometimes between our courts and our prisons, as has been referred to, I've put in place a new urgent query process. That's why we're taking through this House the sentencing bill, which will simplify release. All of those measures will begin to bear down on this issue, and I'm sure Damien Owens will come forward with more measures, and we will take them.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the summer recess, I had the pleasure to visit the probation centre in Dewsbury, where Lucy Nicholson, the head of the probation service, Kirklees Probation Delivery Unit, hosted me and her team. I want to pay tribute to their work, which is made extremely difficult, not just the probation service, but in prisons, by the lack of investment in this service by the previous government. We have accommodation that's full, a lack of funding, lack of resources and reduced staff, no processes in place to protect the public or the staff in the prisons, no systems and no checks and balances. Will the Secretary of State outline the timescales by which some and all of these issues will be addressed so the people in my constituency and across the country can feel safe when they sleep at night?
So State.
Well, I'm very grateful to him centering the importance of probation. It's why I visited the probation service in Islington as the first things that I did when I took office. It's why I was in Chatham, in Kent recently with probation officers. Investing in technology is hugely important to reduce their caseloads. Investing in more staff, hugely important, more than 1,000 last year, 1,300 to come. It does need more resource, and that's why we've committed to 700 million by the next spending review. I'm sure we will return to these issues because I have no doubt about it. The decisions made by former Justice Secretary Chris Grayling were a travesty for probation and for criminal justice in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Justice Secretary tell this House whether in the last 16 months any prisoners have been accidentally released from Hill Grange prison in Worcestershire, and if so, how many?
So State.
As I said, I have released more data today than ever before. He knows that the data release is most often in July. I will look closely at his prison to see, but if 17 prisoners in 2024 were being released in error every month, then he will recognise that that will touch many of our prisoners across the country. But he'll also recognise that there are differences in terms of the CAT and the category of prisoners, and particularly those that have a lot of churn and are letting people out on a more frequent basis than others.
Jack Wren.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Justice Secretary's team say that he found out about the accidental release of Algerian sex offender Kader Sharif on Tuesday evening. He contradicted them by saying he only learned on Wednesday morning. He said at PMQs that he'd been busy shopping for a suit that morning. Did the Lord Chancellor spend any time at all, shopping for a suit after he was told about that prisoner's release?
So State.
No.
Jim Chatham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for his answers? 321 violent or sexual offenders either failed to come back to jail after being temporarily freed, returned later, or breached the term of their licence last year, the highest number for years. Numbers were 177 4 years ago, 59 in 2014-2015. So again, I ask the Secretary of State this question: will the Secretary of State commit to the necessary changes, updating the data, updating the technology in the present system, and all other procedures that are necessary as a matter of public safety and public confidence? Thank you.
Well, he's right to put at the heart of his questions getting back to historic levels before we started to see the increase back in 2021. That is my intent, to get back to levels that are much, much lower than we're seeing now. I've set out the measures this afternoon that we're taking immediately. There will be more that follows Lynn Owens's review. But of course, this will take investment across the prison system.
That completes the statement. Point of order, Robert Jetton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, at one point the Justice Secretary, in answer to questions, said that 17 prisoners were released in error a day under the last Conservative government.
That's what he said.
He then repeatedly said 17 prisoners a month were released in error by the last Conservative government. Neither of those things were correct. The actual figure, and 5 a month is 5 too many, was 5 a month. I know, Mr Speaker, that the Justice Secretary would not want to appear as if he didn't know what he was talking about. Might you be able to get him to correct the record for us?
I think in fairness that I don't want to continue the debate, and that's what we're in danger of doing. I recognise there was a mistake made. I accepted it was a mistake that was made. And therefore, I think you have corrected the record. I think we'll leave it. So, unless the Justice Secretary wishes to come back, of course.
Mr Speaker, I do think that I said that in 2024, 17 prisoners were released in error a month. If I misspoke at any point, then of course I'm happy to correct the record as I just have, but I'm pretty sure I said that on the record as well.
Well, just for the record, mistakenly you said 17 a day, but I knew exactly you meant 17 a month. We will leave it at that. Well, it might be, but I've corrected it for that. Okay, take it. Right. Take it. Okay. We now come to a statement